What's up, y'all? Welcome on into the GoVols247 Podcast. Wes Rucker coming to you from Fort Rucker Studio here on a Monday afternoon in God's own Knoxville, Tennessee. How are you? Hope you're well. Hope you had a good weekend. If you're a Tennessee football fan, I hope you got to relax a bit over the weekend and watch some other teams play, watch some other fan bases go through the trials and tribulations of an SEC football season, and the bumps that you get and the bruises and the setbacks and all those things. Also some fun moments in there. It's not always just terrible, but those are things that kind of come to mind. I think my brain still is a little bit wired in that like decade where October just in early November just sucked for Tennessee. And so it was always like this time of year, it's like it's starting to get a little chilly, which means the football team's about to go on like a 3-game losing streak. And it's not going to be very pretty, but times have changed. So this is a second November in 3 years that will start with Tennessee being right in the thick of things for every championship on the table. Josh Heupel and his Vols will play Kentucky 7:45 p.m. Eastern on Saturday. Will be a dark mode game. So, wear black if you want to do that. You'll probably fit in with everyone else if you do. So that's probably a good idea. We got a lot to talk about that. Also going to talk about some basketball. Tennessee played an exhibition on Sunday. It did not go great, but it's an exhibition. Did not really matter, I think, all that much. We'll discuss that in the second segment. And there were a couple of baseball fall games over the weekend, and Ben's going to have more about that later this week. We're going to have another special edition of the Diamond Balls podcast that will get you covered there, but we'll stick for this episode with football first segment, hoops after the break. And to do all that, we're going to go over to Ben McKee's house, and then we'll go down to Ryan Callahan's house. Fellas, how are we doing today?
Doing all right. My Yankees down 0-2 in the World Series.
I'm going to mention it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, but unfortunately, you asked me how I'm doing. That's affecting my mood. I thought it was supposed to be joyful to watch your team play in the World Series. It has been anything but joyful for me thus far. Hopefully tonight we can get the ship going in the right direction. But I will say I'm feeling better about my professional football team than the other person on this podcast that is about to speak.
What's professional football?
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention the Titans either.
Gosh, that's a whole other story with a lot of issues. Doing okay and ready to watch some football again. Enjoyed a weekend. I always say this about open dates where I get to actually watch a bunch of games. It's not always the case on Saturdays. In fact, usually not the case on Saturdays because no one watches less football than people who cover one team because you spend most of your day traveling to and from the stadium covering the game. You have to kind of catch up on highlights when you get home or whatever. But nice to watch a few games and enjoy and see other fan bases stress out as opposed to us dealing with some tense Tennessee fans, and they got to hopefully catch their breath for the stretch run. It should be pretty entertaining now.
Well, we still got to see some tense Tennessee fans. That came from Sunday's basketball game. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But we will stick to football for the first segment, and it is Kentucky week. This is not necessarily the Kentucky football team that I think at least most of us thought we'd see this season, even those of us like yours truly who always view everything Kentucky football does with a skeptical eye. You still think that what they've been doing the past few years would not lead them to have kind of a season like this. They're on a 3-game losing streak, and a couple of those losses, say what you will about them, they're not the worst, but you let Auburn come into your stadium and beat you right now. That's pretty bad. Auburn had not won a game in the league this season. Had a couple close losses. I'll give them that, but had not won a game and just physically annihilated Kentucky. Just ran the ball right down Kentucky's throat. That's not been the MO of that program since Stoops got there and really addressed the line of scrimmage, brought in all those big corn-fed Midwestern guys up front on the O-line, and got a couple of really big hits at defensive line recruiting, and has done well in the portal. And they've sort of addressed, they thought they had addressed some of that stuff, and for a while they had. And this season, for whatever reason, not working. There is a lot of dissension in the ranks up there. This is a game that, it's a rivalry game, so you never know, guys. And part of me thinks that if Kentucky is going to circle the wagons at all, it would be for this game and then to see where things go moving forward. Like if they lose this one, Yeah, it could be rough down the stretch, but I think they might try their best to get the wagon circle for this one.
Yeah, I think so. And if I were a Kentucky fan, I would hope so. But when assessing this Kentucky football team, I mean that's been their story this season is that obviously Kentucky football has not been in the tier 1 of the SEC during the Mark Stoops era. But there's no doubt that they have done unprecedented things by Kentucky football standards during what is their best. Maybe there are some numbers that would prove otherwise, but I forgive me, I've not done my research on the best stretch of Kentucky football. But it feels like Mark Stoops' era has been the best stretch of Kentucky football, certainly in the modern era at minimum. And the one thing that you could always rely on is, yes, the offense was spotty here and there at best, but they ran the football. They pushed around the defensive front with its offensive line, and then it played great defense. And it was tough. It hustled. It had grit, determination, all the buzzwords that out of a football team or any sports team. And this year's team does not have it. I mean, you already have X's and O's issues. You have personnel that can't compete with the Tennessees, the Georgias, so on and so forth of the world. And I realize they played Georgia close, but you get the gist of what I'm trying to get at. But on top of the personnel issues that Kentucky football already has to deal with, now they're not playing their brand of football, which was all the MO was always where at least even if we're outmanned, we're going to play hard. We're going to play to the echo of the whistle. We're going to play until there's 4 zeros on the scoreboard. And this team has been the polar opposite of the Mark Stoops teams that we became accustomed to seeing. They don't play hard. They give up in the midst of football games. It just simply does not resemble anything we've seen of Mark Stoops' football teams in Kentucky. And I, watching Saturday night, my thought in my head was, is this the beginning of the end of the Stoops era? He looks like somebody who is uninterested in not only just continuing to coach at Kentucky, but it feels like somebody who, like his older brother, Bob, feels like he's kind of ready to get out of the whole coaching profession. And there are multiple quotes from Mark Stoops on the record saying, hey, like I don't want to do this forever. I don't want to die as a football coach. Like I want to have a life after coaching football as well. So that's been the thing that stood out to me, Wes and Ryan. So if I were a Kentucky person, I'd like to think that this team would get up for this weekend's game in Neal and Ryan, but this team has not done a great job of playing hard this season or playing with toughness. So I don't know that they will get up. It feels like a team that is, especially after you lose to Auburn in the manner that you did, it feels like a team that is going to try and get through this last month of the season and get into the offseason and move on to the next chapter of their life, whether that be the NFL draft for a couple of players, whether that be the transfer portal, whether that be looking ahead to next season if you're returning. It feels like this team is on cruise control and just trying to get through this year.
Well, it's like you said, Ben, it's a team that doesn't look like the type of team that we're accustomed to seeing from Mark Stoops. It's not just that they haven't been good lately. This month in particular, the first month of the season had a couple high points.
Yeah.
You know, they go to Ole Miss and win on the road. They nearly upset Georgia in a game that I know frustrated Wes watching it because you're just thinking, have some aggression, go for the win, like play like you're actually an underdog and try to pull the upset.
You coach with a pair, your team will play with a pair.
Yeah. So they had those high points in September that made you think, and maybe that this team still has that in them, but the last 3 games would not suggest they do. They've lost to Vanderbilt. That's something Kentucky often doesn't do. They've been blown out by South Carolina and Florida. So this season, from that standpoint, is already a disappointment because those are kind of the teams that, when Kentucky has been up in recent years, they've beaten those teams.
Yes.
Now they're not winning those games, but then on the flip side, you have that win over Ole Miss that you're like, okay, Ole Miss isn't what we thought they would be going into the season, but they're still a pretty good team. And what do we do with that? How did they go on the road and win that game? So maybe they still have that in them somewhere, that they look maybe capable of that on some days, but for them to give up 48 points to Florida, which a Florida team that's playing better than I think we all expected them to a month ago, and then to give up 24 points to Auburn, but a gazillion rushing yards to Jarquez Hunter. I mean, ran down their throats. And that's something we're not used to seeing against Kentucky teams. So it's not unusual to see them with a struggling offense. It's not unusual to see them lose some games in conference play because of that. But to see them with a defense that's scuffling and a team that, as you kind of alluded to, Ben, just kind of seems a little bit lifeless right now, that's very different for the Mark Stoops era at Kentucky. And this has to be a kind of a circle the wagons moment for Kentucky, because if they don't win this one, they still have a trip to Austin looming ahead. So already with 5 losses, a loss in this game likely dooms you to a losing season. I can't remember when Kentucky's had that happen under Mark Stoops, probably in the first few years, but not recently. So for them not to get to a bowl game, if that's where it's headed, and it certainly looks that way, that's going to be a pretty disappointing year for them, given where they've been and the fact that they've had some transfer portal success, getting, for better or worse, Will Levis and getting Brock Vandegrift, which at the time seemed like a big win for Kentucky, hasn't been all that great so far. So they've got some issues, clearly. Still some talent on this team, guys like Barryon Brown, and they've got some playmakers.
Deion Walker is one of the best football players in the country, the defensive lineman. He's a
no question. Yep. And so they've got some talent still on both sides of the ball, but it's not added up lately for whatever reason to a team that you're really fearful of. At the same time, if you're Tennessee, you're reminded of what happened last time you were coming off an open date. It's a different situation. You're on the road playing a team you don't play all that often. This is a very familiar team that you play every year, that you've had a lot of success against. So I think Tennessee's going to come into this game pretty confident. Night game, dark mode, great. It can be a great atmosphere, you would imagine. There are a lot of reasons for Tennessee to be confident going into this game, but you do still have to show up and take care of business. It's just right now there's a lot of reasons to look at it and think you're going to be able to do that against this Kentucky team.
Yeah, I think the way that Kentucky game at Florida, the way that one ended, you still think, well, it's Gainesville. Sometimes that place can get on you and it can just happen like that. But then the next week you're at home. It's a night game. It's Auburn. There's just not a ton of energy around it. That's a dangerous situation to be in. But this is one that Tennessee, again, there's basically the best thing Kentucky can do now the rest of this football season is pissing people's cornflakes. And there is no bowl of cornflakes those guys would rather piss in than Tennessee's. So I think you have to assume, if you're Tennessee, or expect a fight from Kentucky. And you have to expect that those guys are going to say, well, screw it. Throw everything out there now and see, every card on the table this week. Which is probably their staff's mindset, if I had to guess right now. And if you're Tennessee, it's reached that point now where I don't know. Now, if Tennessee wins every game left on its schedule for the regular season, including Georgia, doesn't matter how you win it. You just win it. If you win all of them, you're going to the playoff. There's just zero question about that. However, if you do lose one of them, let's just say it might be the one in Athens, then it becomes a beauty contest for a lot of the other games. And if you're Tennessee, if you're going to lose one more game this season, I think there's a chance you control your own destiny, but only in the sense that it's not just results. It's the way you play. And I think we know by this point, Tennessee's defense is going to be fine. It's going to be good. We'll see if there's more injuries or anything. And sometimes you just have a bad game. Okay. I'd be willing to give those guys one free pass almost at this point. It's how good they've been, but the offense has got to play better. I think at this point it becomes, you're going down the runway in your swimsuit and you're being judged, and you got to look pretty. And Tennessee's got to win these games, but I think it's got to start winning them with some style. I think they got to look a little more authoritative in some of these games.
I do agree with you. I would say that we don't know that they got to do it just because it's a new 12-team playoff, and we don't quite know. We don't have any evidence to see what the committee is going to do and how they're going to handle different resumes. Of course, I agree with your basic premise of, hey, look more authoritative. Tennessee needs to, because you don't know. And I would recommend the defense not taking a game off, because you just don't know if this offense is going to be able to put up enough points if you do take a game off. But I obviously understood what you were trying to say and agree with you there. That is something the college football playoff rankings, they come out, the first edition, they come out the Tuesday of next week after the Kentucky game. So in a week, we'll be debating all of the rankings. And it's something that, like, right now, I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other in regards to style points and this and that, just because we don't know what the committee is going to be thinking. And even if we kind of knew or had an idea, Ryan, for what the committee was going to assess first and foremost, and the criteria that means most to them, I think kind of like what we saw the last time Tennessee was in the mix, like when they turned around after Tennessee beat Alabama and still elected to rank Alabama ahead of Tennessee. They obviously did not prioritize head-to-head matchups the way that I feel head-to-head matchups should be prioritized. I think the rankings will be very telling as well, is what I'm getting at. If Tennessee comes out, and to Wes's point, they're not ranked maybe as high because the committee would like to see more points from Tennessee's offense or look more authoritative on offense, then I'll be right there with Wes. If Tennessee comes out, and I don't even know where to. I guess there's 7 in the AP poll. You expect them to win this week. If the committee has them closer to 10 than they do 5 going into Mississippi State, then I'm going to be right there with Wes and say, hey, you need to maybe, if you can put up 40 on Mississippi State, 45, you better put 40 and 45 up there and on the scoreboard and leave no doubt. But if Tennessee comes out in those first rankings, and I do think they're around that 5 to 7 mark, which is where they're at now, then I think that would, and maybe I'll be wrong on this, but it feels like that would be telling of the committee being okay where Tennessee currently stands and how it is winning games. And that would make me think that for Tennessee, it's ultimately going to boil down to what you do against Georgia. Maybe what you do in Athens, maybe that dictates the style points that Tennessee needs to put up in the games following. So I don't think we know what the committee is going to do, how they're going to assess Tennessee, how they're going to assess the other teams, what are they going to prioritize. I think they have a real problem on their hand trying to evaluate SEC scheduling compared to other conferences scheduling, especially when you look at the ACC and conferences not named the Big Ten. I'm very curious to see what their thought process is going to be, but those initial rankings will obviously be very telling of kind of Tennessee's path going forward and how they need to handle certain situations if those situations present themselves.
Yeah, and I can understand. It's hard to look at it right now and say, to your point, Ben, that Tennessee's got to win with style points, because, I mean, who thought 2022 was going to turn out the way it did? As it turned out, all Tennessee needed to do was win against South Carolina. They were probably in. It didn't matter how impressive they looked down the stretch.
Definitely in.
We thought it was going to be a mess when we looked at it in early November, that Tennessee was going to be jockeying for position, that style points might matter. And teams just fell off one by one. And they may be the same situation this year, so we just don't know. But the problem is you can sort of game it out and at least envision a realistic scenario now. And now that we have that Texas A&M LSU game in the rearview mirror, that's the one that I think people are looking at. You can envision a 2-loss Texas A&M team, if they lose to Texas at the end of the regular season but otherwise take care of business, being an additional SEC team that throws, makes things more difficult for Tennessee.
Yep.
And Alabama is the big key to me now beyond Texas A&M. If they went out, and I think they're very capable of that, the debate could come down to Tennessee against Alabama or Tennessee against Texas A&M, and A&M at that point would have losses to Texas and Notre Dame. That's going to be a pretty strong-looking resume. So there are scenarios like that make you worry a little bit if you're a Tennessee fan. But to game it out this far out is just you're causing yourself stress for no reason. We literally just have no idea. I mean, Texas A&M could lose to any of the other teams on their schedule. Alabama could lose to LSU. There's so many things that can happen down the stretch. So just take care of business to that point. I think keep winning games. I do think it would behoove Tennessee at some point to figure out its offense to be able to have some things to point to. Maybe to Ben's point, maybe just be competitive against Georgia. You don't want to go down there and lose by 21 and look like you were never in the same league with them and give people something to point to and say, I'm not sure they deserve it because they didn't really hang there on the road against a good team. So, that one's maybe important. generally speaking, they've just got to figure out their offense. I think they're going to need it at some point, whether it's the Vanderbilt game at the end of the regular season, Georgia, obviously, they're going to need to be able to score more points. And a game like this, to bring it back to Kentucky, the one way you could see Kentucky causing some trouble is if Tennessee's offense looks the way it has the last two games, at least for large stretches, if they can't figure out the first half scoring problems. Kentucky's won, they won that game at Ole Miss, 20-17, something like that. They lost to Georgia 13-12. They're not going to be comfortable scoring a lot of points, obviously. A game that gets high scoring is not playing to their strong suit. So leave this game low scoring, let Kentucky hang around. That's where this game could get more interesting. Kentucky had 5 sacks against Auburn on Saturday. They do still have a good pass rush and some things like that could cause Tennessee problems. So I think just in general, just to avoid the upset bug, maybe as much as anything, they do have to get this offense going. Style points, I'm willing to kind of table that conversation until later because there's just so many things that can happen in the next 5 weeks.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering if A&M might actually have jumped Tennessee this week, and I would not be shocked if the playoff committee, when the first rankings come out, I would not be surprised if A&M, is ahead of Tennessee. We'll see what both teams do this weekend, but I think that's a possibility based on sort of the hype machine that was getting going in the second half of that Texas A&M game against LSU.
And I'll put it to you this way. At the Knoxville Quarterback Club on Monday, they have a prayer at the beginning. The chaplain prayed for South Carolina to knock off Texas A&M.
Yeah, these things make strange bedfellows, don't they? I mean,
it's kind of lighthearted, but South Carolina is kind of in an interesting position to be spoiler down the stretch. They play Clemson at the end of the regular season too. Obviously, Clemson's a team that might need to win that game out of conference to win it. Yeah, to keep its resume strong. So they're in a position to maybe ruin things for a couple teams in the month of November. So it's gonna be a fascinating stretch run. But South Carolina is one of those interesting teams that in conference play, you don't really want to see them on your schedule because they've looked like they're capable of that. So I know a lot of Tennessee fans will be watching that game with quite a bit of interest.
And I think West Tennessee is going to need to be not literally having crimson pom-poms out, but rooting for the teams that they have played up until this point. You need Alabama to go on a bit of a winning streak here. You need Alabama to beat LSU, and they go to Texas, if I'm not mistaken. They have another pretty stacked.
Bama goes to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Right before Auburn.
That's right. So Oklahoma's bad.
But it could come down to Tennessee against Alabama at 10-2.
Well, and if it does, I will raise HE double hockey sticks if it does. And I'm not saying this because Tennessee beat Alabama. In that situation, head-to-head should win out regardless. If Arkansas and Tennessee were 10-2 and it came down to Arkansas and Tennessee, Arkansas should get in. I don't care about any other bullet points. Head-to-head should outweigh everything if it presents it.
Who was the highest ranked 1-loss team for a while? Alabama. Who's the highest ranked 2-loss team in the poll right now? Alabama. I got news for everybody. If it comes down to head-to-head with Tennessee and Alabama, I'm just telling you right now, I do not think Tennessee I think it would go to Bama. I just do because
Absolutely.
I think that's how this thing goes. Because that's how the people who vote on these things will look at that
12-team playoff.
Do what now?
We haven't had a 12-team playoff.
No, but I'm saying if it comes down to I'm saying if like the 10th or 11th spot comes down to Tennessee or Alabama and they both have 2 losses, I do not think Tennessee would be the team that got in. I just don't.
Completely agree. I think it's going to be bad because
based off of Alabama, the name being voted in.
They would have.
When has Alabama gotten in over a team in this situation that you're presenting? When has Alabama gotten in?
They were just in the playoff
last year,
and it was
when
controversial.
Florida State's quarterback tore his ACL. That's not the same situation that we are presenting here with Tennessee and Alabama head to head.
And who else was in Ohio State? There was another team they got in over that also had.
Right. That was because Florida State's quarterback Jordan Travis blew out his knee. That's not the particular situation we're declaring here. If I would be stunned if I know that's going to be a fear of the I was going to say logo on the side of the helmet. They have numbers on the side of the helmet. The Alabama logo the fear will creep in because of that, and I totally get that. But I don't think maybe I'm being too optimistic. Maybe I'll look like an idiot at some point. I'm more glass half full than y'all are. But I would like to think that if Tennessee and Alabama are sitting 10-2 and Tennessee's second loss is at Georgia, I'd like to think that the committee looks at the head-to-head and says, especially given we have not seen an Alabama team's resume have a loss at Vanderbilt, whether Vanderbilt is a better version of Vanderbilt or not, they lost at Vanderbilt. That cannot be something on their resume that allows them to get in when the direct competition of resumes they're battling beat their resume. That can't happen. I would be stunned if that happened.
I'm foreseeing an interview where they're talking to whoever the head of the committee is this year, and that committee says, well, we know that Tennessee beat Alabama on a new, that was in Knoxville, though, and it was a close game, and we think if these two teams play today on a neutral field, we think Alabama would win that game or would be favored to win that game.
Absolutely.
And that's what they'll say.
That's not how they're putting teams in the playoff. That has nothing to do with your resume.
At that point, Alabama would have wins over Georgia and LSU, 2 wins that would objectively be as good as any win Tennessee has, and Tennessee would only have the Alabama win, really.
Okay, now do the losses.
Tennessee's loss to Arkansas might be similar to Vanderbilt at the end of the season. We'll see. That might be part of the discussion. But I'm just saying I agree with Wes. I'm
not saying I agree that would be the right decision. I'm saying I think that's what the decision would be.
I think it would be too. I mean, this is all premature, but if it comes down to that's why I think at Tennessee, if you're a Tennessee fan, you want LSU to beat Alabama. I don't think you want Alabama in that discussion at the end of the season.
I do it differently. I think you want the teams that you have beaten up into this, or beaten/lost to up into this point. I think you want Arkansas to go on a run. I think you'd like to see Oklahoma try and win some games from the second half of the year. And I disagree on Alabama. I'm in the camp of I would rather see them win out essentially and make that win look even better. Because right now, what is your bona fide great win that you can boast when it does come time to boast your resume?
But if
Alabama starts losing, then I think if Alabama starts losing, then people are going to start picking Tennessee's resume apart because they haven't beaten anybody.
But Alabama, it literally just might come down to Tennessee against Alabama and, say, Notre Dame. It might be a discussion of just those 3 teams. So who cares if the resume is strong if that team against you that you're worried has been ahead of you in the polls all year is still right there? I'm with Wes. I think Alabama has to be eliminated. You want Alabama to go 9-3, but you don't want Alabama to go 10-2 and be right there with you if that's how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, again, to Ben's point, this situation has not presented itself yet, so we do not know. And I agree with that. And I'm not saying what I'm saying with 100% conviction, but I am saying that's the way I would lean for sure. Is that would just be, to me, the way my brain works is, oh, that's how that would go. That's just how that would go. But
I think to me, that's just, I don't know that fear is the right word. I can't think of a better word, so forgive me. But to me, that's just fear of old Alabama creeping in. And old Alabama does not exist anymore.
I think there's still maybe you could call it jaded. You could call it pessimistic. There's a lot of words you could call it. I mean, I don't think any of them are unfair.
Alabama should not be viewed today what it was under Nick Saban. And
that Georgia
win is the point that y'all are making.
That
Georgia win's going to look really good, I think, at the end of the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. But to me, to get it back to this week for now for Kentucky, I'll say this before we get out of here, is the one of the reasons that since Heupel's been at Tennessee, I have never really felt any sort of nerves for them going into a game against Kentucky. And that's because from the entire time Heupel's been at Tennessee, for the most part, Tennessee could just outscore Kentucky. Even if Kentucky was a good team, even if Kentucky could kind of take the air out of the ball and do some stuff, I just always felt like, oh, it's Heupel against Stoops. Heupel's going to outscore him. If you can get to like 28 points, 30 points, you're beating Kentucky most of the time. So, and I think it was Ryan earlier in this podcast who said, like, maybe that's not the case right now for Tennessee. Maybe we have to sit there and look at it and say, hey, this offense needs to play better. It needs to, capitalize on some of those vertical shots. It's got to just tighten up a little bit, stop with some of the penalties, protect a little better, stop having, backs miss a pass pro here or there in bad spots. They just got to tighten some stuff up, and they got to be more explosive, because if they don't, then you're playing a kind of game where Kentucky can fight with you. If you let Kentucky drag you down into a fight, then you're in for a fight. But if you go out there and you just stomp, and go out there and score some points and get out there early, I think you could maybe boat race this bunch. So that's what it comes down to for me.
Well, especially since Kentucky has looked like a team that's capable of rising to the occasion. They've sort of, I mean, not the last few weeks, but they've played to the level of their competition a couple times against highly ranked teams like Tennessee. So that's the part that maybe concerns you a little bit. But again, that's in the month of September now. That's weeks in the rearview mirror. So is that same team capable of rising up and playing that way against a good team? If Tennessee's offense still can't get it together, to your point, Wes, that's the scenario where you let a team like that hang around, make a mistake, a pick six or whatever can happen. And next thing you know, a close game turns into a scary game down the stretch. So I just think Tennessee's going to need its offense at some point down the stretch. Maybe it's not this week. Maybe it's the Vanderbilt game. Maybe it's the Mississippi State game. Mississippi State's getting a little feistier here recently. So there could be a game where they're going to need to score more points. It's probably not this one, but and Kentucky has yet to score more than 20 points against a Power 4 opponent this year. So I think 24 points is probably going to be enough to win this one. But you got to start scoring in the first half. You got to just get your offense going a little bit better. And I'm not sure at this point that we're going to see just some explosion someday where it all just clicks for Tennessee. Maybe we will at some point.
I think we'll see it once.
Yeah, very possible. But on the whole, though, just for the most part down the stretch, I doubt we see it. So this offense, though, can take another step, and I think they've got to become the kind of offense that can score 31, 27, 34, somewhere in that range, instead of what we've seen lately, the 23s, the 24s, the 14 against Arkansas. They can't keep having those types of games, and especially the goose eggs in the first half. That's what's got to stop, or someone eventually that you shouldn't let hang around is going to give you a really tough game.
If Tennessee performs like it did offensively, if it performs like it did in the first half against Arkansas, Florida, Alabama, then Kentucky's going to have a chance to win this football game late. I still think if the offense is sputtering a bit, I still think that Tennessee would win a close, ugly football game, kind of like what we saw with Florida. Yeah. Now, if the second half was kind of the beginning of a new season for the offense, then I think Tennessee boat races Kentucky. It's just a matter of which Tennessee offense shows up. Is it the first half against Alabama? Is it the second half against Alabama? And depending on which one shows up, I think you're going to get two totally different football games. I still think Tennessee wins regardless. It's just a matter of, is it a really impressive win, or do you walk out of Neyland on Saturday night following an ugly, close win, being a little disappointed in the performance? So to me, it's very simplistic in that sense this week. I mean, Tennessee – I would be maybe speaking to Wes's point earlier just about the team coming out of the bye week. I would be surprised if they were not ready to play on Saturday for a couple of reasons. I think the bye week going into the Arkansas game was obviously a great lesson learned, unfortunate lesson learned, but in hindsight, and now that you've got that loss behind you, you'd like to use that as great motivation moving forward to handle your business in the correct way. Unfortunately, sometimes your biggest growth can come from losses. That's in your personal life. That's in sports, in a team setting. And I feel like this team is going to take a big step forward and grow the most from that loss because of how they handled the open week. So not only that, but yes, Kentucky – Tennessee owns Kentucky. There's no bones about it. Kentucky has not beaten a Tennessee team that has finished with a winning record since 1984, and they certainly do not win inside of Neyland Stadium. But the last couple of years have been close games. Really, the only one that hasn't has been 2 years ago, the last time Kentucky and Will Levis were in here, and Tennessee just beat them into the ground all night long. That other than that, under the Stoops era, almost every game has been very, very close and hard fought down to the wire. So not only do I think the second open week was a wake-up call for Tennessee, but a lot of these players that will be playing on Saturday for Tennessee, they remember the close game that they played in Lexington last year. And although you blew them out the last time you were in Neyland, the year before that, Heupel's first year in 2021, that was also a game that came down to the wire in Lexington. So I don't think that Tennessee is going to go into this one being too comfortable. I think that they understand for a myriad of reasons that they better show up locked in, ready to play, or Kentucky will keep it closer than they should.
And one one big thing working in their favor coming off the open date, few guys a little healthier. I think that's a big deal. Squirrel White obviously was struggling, couldn't get that arm up on that one pass he tried to one hand. Brew McCoy has been banged up. Dante Thornton, obviously, that getting a few of those guys some extra rest, I think is meaningful when you're about to play 5 straight games. So we'll see. I'm interested in seeing if this team looks noticeably fresher in that regard. And maybe that gives them a little bit more juice offensively to have those guys closer to 100%.
Yeah, and you'd rather not have Dylan Sampson touch the ball 30 times every single game. So if you could make some more plays, you could spread the wealth a little bit and maybe keep him from kind of leaking oil down the stretch. I think that would be big for Tennessee too. But it's 1 week seasons, and this week the season is Kentucky, and we will see. There's not a ton of guarantees for Saturday. I would say maybe a Gerald Mincy, Omar Norman Lott fight would be a guarantee. That just seems like something that just would happen. And I don't know. I don't know if those two. Yeah, I don't know what now.
I said Mincy was out Saturday, wasn't he? So
yeah, but I mean, if he's back, I don't know if he's back or not. But if he is, I'm putting a
please, Gerald Mincy. That guy, he's making a business decision. He knows better than to show up and play in this football game.
I hope he plays,
and I hope he does too, because it will be entertaining. But that guy, he's had a lot to say. He was an absolute headache for Tennessee to deal with. His teammates in that room could not stand him, which was why Tennessee was fine letting him walk out the door. And he has done nothing but run his mouth. He would be smart to find a way to not play in this football game. And if he's not able to play, Kentucky would be smart to make sure that he stays in Lexington, because he's the type of guy that if he's not playing and he's just on the sideline, he's the type of guy that would – remember we had that Tennessee Vanderbilt brawl where the Vanderbilt bench cleared – I guess it was last year, but then also with Jawan, if I'm not mistaken, there's been 2 in recent years. Now that I think about it, isn't that right? There's one.
Speaking of stomping earlier, there was a little bit of a Jawan stompy there.
That one, and then last year, didn't the benches clear because of Will Shepherd?
There was an altercation.
Something like that.
There was a kerfuffle. I don't know if it was a full out Donnybrook or a Tilly, but
where the benches kind of clear, like we see in baseball. Where a lot of the Vanderbilt bench came up.
What'd you say?
Right. Yeah, Gerald Mincy starts that type of stuff if he's not playing. So,
and so does Omar Norman.
It would be smart to leave him in Lexington if he's not able to play. And the way that Gerald Mincy shies away from standing on business, I'm sure he'll find a way to not play in this game, because I think that Tennessee defensive front will have something for him if he elects to play or can play.
Oh, and he and Omar Norman Lott both could be ejected from the game.
Yes, 1,000%. Those two guys.
Everything you say about Mincy in terms of some of the worries on the field, Omar Norman Lott's the exact same way. He is.
The difference is Omar's a good football player and Gerald is not. So it should be a rule that those two guys cannot be on the field at the same time, because something will absolutely happen. It won't be the old traditional baseball benches clearing, just talking to each other. That would be a Donnybrook. There's no doubt about that one.
Somebody's getting a black eye at the very least if that happens. Like, there's no question. So, but we will see. We'll see as the week develops. We'll definitely be looking for that injury report every day when it comes out this week, as we will every week. And you can get that obviously at GoVols247.com every evening from Wednesday on around 8 o'clock. You can usually 8 Eastern or so. You can usually see it just after that. So we'll have more. For now, we're going to let Ryan go, and we'll step away and pay some bills, listen to product, services, in-house ads, etc. And then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit of basketball, Ryan. So, but until then, why don't you go ahead and get out of here?
Thanks, guys.
We'll be right back here on the GoVols247 Podcast. #ad.
Chase
Welcome back to the Sneezy McSneezerton podcast here, GoVols247.com. Wes Rucker, joined by Ben McKee, who just sneezed but did have his microphone on mute. And I'm only mentioning it because the video's up and it will be there, so you'll be able to see it there. But welcome back to the GoVols247 Podcast. Hope you're still doing well. Talked a little Tennessee football there in the first segment. Now we're going to switch over to talk a little Tennessee basketball after a quick request from our end to please go in there. If you could rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. No matter where you can cast the fine pod in this world, you can find the GoVols247 Podcast, and you can also find us now on YouTube and on Facebook there at the GoVols247 Facebook and YouTube pages. So regardless of where you're listening or whether you're watching, please rate, please review, please leave a fresh review. That helps us out tremendously with all the algorithms to get this thing out to everybody else. And also keep telling all your friends. One of my favorite things, just kind of walking around town, during the week, going from here to there, is hearing people tell me about how they either found the podcast or how they told random people that they met to go and find the podcast themselves. And that still works, right? The good old fashioned game of old school telephone still works. So please keep doing that. Please. It really, really helps us out tremendously. If you're already doing all that stuff, thank you. We love you. If not,
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Ben, straight back into it with basketball. The 12th ranked Tennessee Volunteers hosted 18th ranked Indiana or 17th ranked Indiana in a charity exhibition on Sunday at Food City Center, Thompson Bowling Arena, whatever you want to call it. You and I were both there. Tennessee lost the game 66-62. Tennessee, I'm not going to say played badly, just didn't shoot well. I think those are different things. Obviously, shooting is a part of playing well. I'm not saying that they're not connected in some ways, but I thought the offense worked. I thought they got, for the most part, shots that I would be fine with them taking. Just didn't make them. Zakai Ziegler and Chaz Lanier they combined to go 4 of 22 from three. And Ziegler goes out of the game for a couple minutes in the second half, and that's where Indiana goes on a run, takes the lead, and then down the stretch, with Rainier especially, they played a little they played a little bully ball and got to the rim, and Tennessee just lipped out a couple shots at the end and couldn't get back in it. What were your thoughts overall? Because for me, I'm not at all super concerned about things.
No, I agree. I'm not super concerned. There are a couple of concerns that we can touch on before we get out of here. I guess my biggest concern would be the production at that 4 spot, the traditional power forward spot that is now referred to as the 4 in the positionless day and age of basketball that we now live in. But ultimately, I just thought it was a poor shooting night. I don't even like calling it bad offense, to your point. I agree with you, because Rick Barnes' offense got open looks to me in basketball, and I guess it applies to football as well. Like, bad offense is not scheming up plays or having a system that allows your players to produce. And I don't like putting it all on the players. There are things that the coaches could have done better. But there were also decisions in that game, because it was an exhibition, that were made because it was an exhibition. So the poor coaching decisions, or not lack of adjustments, but over adjustments by putting in players who won't receive significant amount of playing time in the second half, because you wanted those guys to experience some things that they will experience at some point down the road. Like, those were the quote unquote bad coaching decisions, and they were done purposefully because it was an exhibition. So I don't like to suggest that it was bad offense, because the offense produced shots. Just in basketball, it's a little bit different, because you can get open looks and the shots didn't go in. And that has been a bit of a theme during the Rick Barnes era. I acknowledge that. But in an exhibition, when you've had a lot of guys in and out of the lineup in the preseason, because they haven't had a severe injury, but they've had guys with nicks and knacks and had to have a day or 2 or 3 off, then it just looked kind of out of sorts. It looked like it's not gelled together, and it's not supposed to be gelled together right now. So I'm not overly cautious. There are certainly, again, some things to be concerned about moving forward. But right now, I'm just kind of keeping it as a footnote in my brain, something to pay attention to. If it's the end of November and we're getting close to Christmas and the beginning of SEC play, and this team continues to be a poor shooting team, then obviously we'll look back in hindsight and be like, hey, that was a sign of things to come. But there's just not enough data right now to suggest that this is a bad shooting team. This is a bad offensive team. The offense got open looks. They didn't make them. And Chaz Lanier, I'd like to think that he's not going to have as many poor shooting nights like the one he had last night. And then Zakai, 2 of 10, didn't take a shot from within the three-point line. I'd like to think that he's not going to have a ton of those nights either. So I do have question marks about that 4 spot with Igor Milicic and Darlington Dubar, but there were other things that I liked and would like to think that a lot of the shots that they attempted last night are going to go in at some point. And here's the other thing, my last point, I don't mean to be long-winded here, Wes, but
go.
If Rick didn't think he had a good shooting team, then why would he allow his team to shoot as many threes as they did last night?
Never would. Never in a million years.
Exactly. And look, again, I'll say this a second time. I said it earlier. I recognize that there have been teams under Rick who the offense has gotten open looks for, and they did not go in. And Rick's line throughout the year was, I'd like to think at some point they're going to go in. I get that there's somewhat of a history there, but I don't think that's the case with this team. So that's kind of my last thought on the shooting aspect of it. Like if this was not a good shooting team, I'm not even suggesting that it's the best shooting team in the country or anything along those lines, but I don't think it's a bad shooting team. And if it were a bad shooting team, Rick's not allowing his team to take, 35 3-point attempts last night. He's not allowing that to happen.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One, I'm glad you mentioned the defense at the 4 position, because that was one thing that definitely stood out to me yesterday. And I think for all the complaints at times with guys like with Josiah Jordan-James and some of the stuff he didn't do, a bunch of us, not to toot our own horn, Ben, but a lot of us for a long time said there's a lot of things that he does, and when he's not here, you'll probably notice them. And I think you saw it straight away last night, because last night when Renu got the ball down the stretch and just kind of bullied his way or got around or over Milicic to score some buckets, Josiah Jordan-James doesn't allow that. Like Josiah Jordan-James goes out there and checks him, and he's physical enough and quick enough and athletic enough and smart enough to keep that guy in front of him and to not let him get bullied past. And so, and again, Milicic has been here for like a couple months. I'm not saying that it's just going to be a disaster all year long, but there were a couple times that he's got either bullied over or run around. And that's something that, in a game, in a game that mattered, I think Rick Barnes would have had a decision to make on what to do there. He may have put a different person in. He may have put Meshack down there to give him a different kind of look. He may have mixed some things up. And I think that's one thing that, with Dubar, I think he's athletic enough. And I think Milicic is too. But, Dubar's got to learn what they're doing schematically. He's got to pick up on some of this stuff, because that's an issue right now with him. And Milicic, he's a coach's son, so that there's not as much of a question there. But he's just got to, I think he's just got to be a little tougher at times defensively. And I think he can do that. But offensively, so many things that happened yesterday, including down the stretch there in the final couple minutes, it reminded me of a conversation that I had with Zakai Ziegler just a few weeks ago. And I don't know if I mentioned it in the post-game full court press. I may have, I may not have. I honestly don't remember. But
I think you mentioned it on the our little 20-minute segment preview.
Okay, good.
Last week.
But yeah, okay. Then I'll say it quicker here. All Zakai Ziegler had to do last season was learn what Dalton Connect wanted to do, because he knew what everybody else in the program. He knew what they could do, what they could not do, where they'd want to be in certain situations, what they would do, how they would react. He knew all of these things about all of these guys. He just needed to learn Connect, and then they were good to go. This season, it's very different. There's a lot of guys that have transferred into this program. And you got Bishop Boswell coming in as a freshman too. There are Meshacks and other guys that he knows, obviously, but there are a bunch of guys on this team that he is still trying to figure out what's this guy want to do in this situation. And last night, when they're trying to run that play down the stretch, it didn't come off the way they wanted it to for whatever reason. And Ziegler probably should have taken timeout, but instead he just kind of forced up a 3. Not the worst shot, but one you could probably do better than. I don't know if that happens last year. So that's where, and there were other situations where things just didn't quite come off the way you'd want them to. And I think they're just sort of learning each other. And, Meshack and Estrella's been in and out of the lineup. Meshack the past few days, again, had been out with a knee thing, or at least a little limited. Other guys have been dealing with stuff on and off. I'm not concerned that they won't do it. I think there is a possibility that there will be some hiccups early in the season. I absolutely believe that's possible, but I still like the talent on that bunch. I like defensively. I think this team could be really, really good. I know I just said that stuff about Milicic and Dubar and all that, but when you have Ziegler, Meshack, and Felix Okpara out there together, you're going to have a hell of a hard time scoring the ball. And as much as I don't really want to see Phillips and Okpara playing together too much, because that puts two non-shooters on the floor offensively, that group defensively, when they had the 4 of those 5 were the 4 or 5 out there, that was explosive defense. Those few minutes those guys were out there together. So I think defensively this team again will be great, and I think offensively, if Lanier's going to act like Lanier does most of the time or has in his career, they'll be fine. But they need him to score.
They do. They absolutely do. And I'm very curious to see how the first 10 to 15 games play out, because curious in the sense of does that prove to be genuine, or does it come back to bite us in the butt of like, hey, that Indiana performance was something to be concerned about going forward? Because again, like, shooting struggles aside, it was very clear that Igor Milicic and Darlington Dubar trying to adjust. I mean, D Stone only plays 5 minutes. That's very telling. And Rick, I asked Rick why he only played 5 minutes, and he was very short and to the point. That said, it all comes down to practice and understanding what they want from us. So it's clear that Dubar needs to take some steps quick, fast, and in a hurry if he wants to solidify a role in the rotation. But Igor, I thought, was fine. It's just, to your point, Wes, like, you can just kind of tell that he's maybe thinking too much and instead of playing, because he doesn't want to mess up. And it's not that he doesn't want to mess up because Rick's going to yell at him or anything. He doesn't want to mess up because, like, Josiah and Santi, say what you will about them in terms of like skill wise and just making plays, they knew the system inside and out because they had been here forever.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have a roster outside of Zakai and Jamai that has not been here for forever. Like, even JP Estrella and Cam Carr do not know the system inside and out. It's Zakai, it's Jamai, and everybody else is trying to learn on the fly. And so I do think there are going to be some hiccups this first month or two of the season, and that's okay. That's okay, because when you're where Tennessee basketball is right now, the expectation is winning in March, and you just need to make sure that the pieces are clicking the way that they need to by the time February and March rolls around. And I think that they still have the pieces to do that, because I look at the game on Sunday evening and think, okay, shots didn't go down, and you can tell there were some guys, Felix Okpara, Igor, Lanier, they're just kind of second guessing what they're doing on the floor. And I don't think that they're second guessing because of poor coaching. I think they're second guessing just because it's the first game, air quotes, that they're playing in a new system. And it's different doing it in a game and doing it in practice, especially under Rick, because Rick will blow a whistle and stop the play if you inbound the basketball incorrectly. It's
or
a
if
miracle.
you're standing in the wrong place by a foot.
Yes, it's a miracle if they get through a play without Rick blowing the whistle. So it's a totally different ball game trying to do it in a game. So I think they'll be fine. We'll see with these first 5, 10, 15 game sample sizes, and I'm very curious to learn about this team as we go. I just think that there's going to be growing pains early in the season because you're bringing a lot of new pieces together. And it's not just the transfers either. I mean, you saw glimpses of Cam Carr last night. You saw glimpses of JP Estrella. You saw glimpses of Cade Phillips. Now, I think Cade's ceiling is different than JP and Cam's. Like, JP and Cam, looking the next year, they should be bona fide starters in Rick's lineup. And I think Cade, his ceiling is more of sixth man and really good role player. We talked about that on the last podcast. So even those guys, even the guys who were on the team last year and are young now, they're stepping in the roles that they've never played before. So I just think there's going to be a lot of growing pains, probably more growing pains than people would like. But that's what happens when you have a lot of transition from one season to the next. And I know there's going to be some freak out here and there, but it's okay. They're supposed to have some hiccups early in the season, as long as you make sure those pieces come together by the time the tournament rolls around. And I still think they have the pieces to do that, Wes.
Yeah, I think there were times in that game where you saw like some decisions where they'd thrown a lob pass and that was the correct decision to make given the look that was presented to them, but they didn't quite have the connection where it needed to be. You know, you're just learning, okay, when's he going to take off? Where's he going to go? Where's he going to be? There's just little things like that when you're meshing, when you know that pass is where it needs to be almost all the time, because you know that person well enough to do that. And that just a couple times didn't quite come off the way it should have, because they're just learning some stuff. There were also a couple times where with Milicic, he would catch the ball in the corner and he actually made a pretty decent play. Like he did the pump fake and then put the ball on the deck, took a couple dribbles and got to the rim and scored. But I would say that in a couple of those situations, he was open from behind the 3-point line. And I know he's a good shooter. So I would have said, shoot that ball. Go ahead and take that shot. It's fine if you're going to get somebody to bite on a pump fake and then you get a lane to go lay the ball in, especially when a team's not shooting great from three in a game. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think if he's like last season, if he's at Charlotte, he catches that ball, he just confidently puts that shot up. And I'd like, things like that when you're not thinking too much, when you're just playing the game, there's some of that stuff that will come to them. And I also think, and this may be the last thing I got for now, was from that game, I think Rick's reaction to it told you quite a bit. Like even early season games or games where the stakes weren't really high for Tennessee, I've seen Tennessee lose games and Rick Barnes just come out furious. He does not like to lose. He can be a pill to be around sometimes when they lose. He can get a little hickory mad, a little hickory redneck mad. But last night it was an exhibition, or yesterday it was an exhibition. And I think he saw some of the things that we're talking about now, some things that, yes, I'm going to make these guys watch film. Yes, I'm going to put them on the Versa climb. Yes, I'm going to give them hell the next few days, but I'm not overly concerned about this. And I think that you can sort of read into that what you will, but as someone who, we've been around Rick for long enough now, a decade or so, we know him. He did not seem that bothered by it. Like he thought, I expected to see some of this stuff. He admitted that he played some lineups he would not play during a regular season game that counted, even if it was next week. He wouldn't do it, but he tried some stuff. Some of it worked, some of it didn't, but there were reasons why they tried it. And I think that's, he was still, like, I put it this way. He was competitive. He's competitive enough to play Zakai Ziegler 37 minutes in an exhibition, but he's not crazy enough to play him 40. Like, there's a difference in those two things. One of them is still a little too competitive, but at least it's not crazy. And, a couple, like, I think he keeps Ziegler. That's a game that if it's in a couple weeks, Ziegler's playing 40 minutes. I'll tell you right now, he is. He's not coming out unless he's in foul trouble. And that's how it's going to be at times. And also, I think he would have made some defensive adjustments down the stretch rather than just say, okay, guys, stiffen up and make a play here. They're coming at you. Just, play good defense, keep the guy in front of you, and let's do this. He would have changed some stuff in a regular season game, I think, and he just didn't. And so I think he may have actually done some things different offensively too. But that's why I'm not – if I had seen Rick come out furious, I'd probably have a different reaction. But watching Rick be like, nah, I think it's got to do some stuff better, but it's all right. That to me said a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not saying that he was smiling from ear to ear and cracking jokes, but when he walked through the door to come speak with us, I mean, he had somewhat of a grin on his face, and I thought that was very telling as well. At the end of the day, it was an exhibition. They did things that they feel are going to benefit young players down the road, as they should, because it is a game that does not matter at the end of the day, does not count in the win-loss columns. It does not hurt or help your resume. So they made decisions in that game for the long-term health of the program that they will not make when they play at Louisville in just under 2 weeks next Saturday. So I agree with you. I had the same interpretation. Certainly, there are some thoughts, concerns that I am setting to the side to come back and revisit. But I still don't feel any. I don't feel any differently about this team's ceiling. This to me is a team that is 1,000% an NCAA tournament team and a team that is capable of reaching the Final Four. It's just about getting those pieces to click and gel by the time February and March rolls around, as I talked about previously. So I'm not concerned about this basketball team. Overall, again, some things I'm setting to the side to revisit down the road, but I'm not at all concerned about this team coming out of Sunday evening.
I don't want to get into one of those situations where, and it's probably unavoidable, but like every time this team doesn't shoot like 38 or 39% from three, it seems like there's a referendum every single time it doesn't happen. And I'm not, it's October. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it in November either. I'm not doing it. There's too many other things going on. I'm not, you know what? January, February, March. Okay. Then yeah. And if the wheels fall off before then, obviously that changes things. But I'm saying, like, if they're doing okay, and I don't want to do this every single time that they don't like every single time they don't score like 80 or 90 points or shoot 40% from three. I don't want to have the same damn conversation. I just don't want to do it.
I'm with you. And we had one of the greatest examples of all time. That Tennessee baseball pitching staff was very above average for the large majority of the season, and then when it mattered most, it clicked for them and allowed them to win the national championship. I'm not saying at all that Tennessee basketball is going to win the national championship, but they have the pieces in place that can help them make a run in March, very similar to how baseball had the pieces in play to make a run when the postseason rolled around. So it's all about just making sure the pieces click. That to me would be more of a concern if I was watching last night and thinking, oh boy, they're missing this, that, and the other. I didn't have that takeaway. I had the takeaway of they played poorly. It's a team that hasn't played a lot of basketball together, and I trust the coaching staff to get them to where they need to be by the time the thick of SEC play rolls around.
Yeah, and Chaz Lanier might not be Dalton Connect, but he's not going to be Tyreek Key either. He's going to be he's a good player. I've seen enough of it. I'm telling you, Ben's seen more than I have, and I've seen enough. He's good. He's good. He's going to be just fine. Don't worry about him. And you know what? Rick Barnes let him take about a shot a minute yesterday and didn't say anything about it. So he's going to let him shoot
did not take him out of the game because he was shooting the basketball poorly. Took him out of the game because, in Rick's words, he was not doing anything else to impact the game. If he would have been playing stout defense or rebounding or something along those lines, he would have been left in the game and would have been able to continue shooting. But Rick was adamant multiple times after the game that he did not pull him because he was missing shots. So
yes.
Again, kind of like my point, 35 threes. If Rick thought this was a bad shooting team, he would not allow them to take 35 threes. And
he'd tell us that. He'd tell us that because he can't keep anything to himself.
1,000%. If he thought Chaz was a bad shooter, Chaz isn't getting 16 shots up in an exhibition.
Yep. I think we'll see where that goes. Again, let's maybe wait for the real games let's wait for the real games and hopefully several real games before we really start having a referendum. Let's just not do that. Let's be better than that. Let's see if we can do that. But for now, we will see where things go. Obviously, basketball is part of the conversation going forward now until March, basically. And, baseball, we're going to have a podcast, another one this week. Ben's going to have a couple special guests again to talk some of the guys who have actually seen Ben and some of the guys who have seen some of the fall baseball, or pretty much all of it. They will be there then, and we'll try to get in touch with our friends from Cat's Paws for some stuff this week too, and we'll have that on the site and maybe on here on the podcast feed too. But until then, we're going to leave it right there because it's a Monday and that's a busy day for us, and we all got a lot of stuff to do. But for now, thank you for being here, Ben. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Wes.